The war had been going on for 3 years, and humanity was losing badly. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, watching through the main screen as another human colony burned in space. Orange and red flames erupted from the settlements on the planet's surface, visible even from orbit. Thousands of people were dying down there, and there was nothing he could do to save them. The Kethrin Collective had appeared without warning, sweeping through human space like a storm of fire and death. Their ships were massive, each one the size of a city. Their weapons could destroy entire fleets with single shots. Their shields could take any hit humanity threw at them and barely flicker. In 3 years of war, humans had not won a single major battle. Jake turned away from the screen. He couldn't watch anymore. Behind him, Dr. Lisa Grant was reviewing data on her tablet, her fingers moving quickly across the surface. She had been acting strange for the past week, ever since returning from an archaeological dig on Kepler 442b. She kept saying she had found something important, something that could change everything. "Commander, I need to show you something," Lisa said quietly. Her voice was tight with tension. Jake walked over to her station. Lisa pulled up images on her tablet, showing a strange crystalline structure buried deep underground on the distant world. The crystal was enormous, perhaps 50 feet tall, and it glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "What am I looking at?" Jake asked. "Salvation," Lisa replied. "Or damnation. I'm not sure which yet." She explained what she had learned from the ruins surrounding the crystal. An ancient civilization had lived on Kepler 442b millions of years ago. They had faced their own extinction event, something that threatened to wipe them out completely. In desperation, they had built this device, something they called the Ascension Matrix. The Matrix could transform living beings into something more than physical creatures. It rewrote them at the quantum level, turning flesh and blood into energy and consciousness. The ancient aliens had used it to transcend their bodies, becoming beings of pure power. They had become what humans might call gods. Where did they go? Jake asked, studying the images. "Nobody knows," Lisa said. "They left their world behind and disappeared into deep space. But the Matrix is still there, still functional. I tested it with small animals. It works, Jake, it really works." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He understood what Lisa was suggesting without her having to say it. Transform humans the same way. Create beings powerful enough to fight the Kethrin on equal terms. Turn soldiers into gods. How many people would we need? He asked. "The Matrix can handle 20 at once," Lisa said. "Any more than that and the energy requirements become impossible to sustain. 20 people. 20 volunteers to become something more than human. 20 chances to save their entire species from extinction." Admiral Kevin Barnes called an emergency meeting of the Terran Alliance War Council 3 days later. The meeting took place deep underground in Geneva, in bunkers built to survive nuclear war. Half of Earth's population was already living in similar shelters, hiding from Kethrin bombardment. Lisa presented her findings to a room full of military commanders and government leaders. She showed them videos of mice and rabbits going through the transformation process. The animals entered the Matrix as normal creatures and emerged glowing with inner light, able to move objects with their minds and generate energy from nothing. "What happened to them afterward?" asked General Frank Cooper. "They lived for about 3 days in their transformed state," Lisa admitted. "Then their bodies destabilized and they died. But I believe that's because their brains weren't complex enough to handle the transformation. Human brains are different. We should be able to maintain stability." "Should be," Frank said. "You're asking us to approve a process based on should be?" "I'm asking you to approve our only chance at survival," Lisa shot back. "The Kethrin fleet will reach Earth in 6 weeks. Every conventional weapon we have barely scratches their shields. We need something new, something they won't expect." The debate went on for hours. Some council members argued it was too dangerous, too uncertain. Others pointed out that certain death was also dangerous and very certain. Eventually, Admiral Barnes called for a vote. The motion passed by a narrow margin. They would proceed with the Ascension project. 20 volunteers would be transformed using the Matrix. If it worked, they would become humanity's champions. If it failed, they would die, and humanity would face the Kethrin with conventional weapons and conventional courage, and probably lose anyway. Finding volunteers was easier than anyone expected. Within 24 hours of announcing the project, over 10,000 people had applied. Soldiers who had lost families to the Kethrin, scientists who wanted to push the boundaries of human potential, ordinary civilians who simply wanted to do something, anything, to help. The selection committee chose carefully. They needed people with strong minds and strong bodies, people who could handle the pain of transformation, people who wouldn't break under the weight of godlike power. Captain Ryan Mitchell was selected. He had been a Marine for 12 years and had fought in 15 battles against the Kethran. He had watched his entire platoon die on a station in the Tau Ceti system. He volunteered because he had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Dr. Amy Watson was selected. She was a physicist who had helped Lisa study the Matrix. She understood the science better than anyone except Lisa herself. She volunteered because she wanted to know what it felt like to touch the fundamental forces of the universe. Jake Morrison was selected. He was a commander with extensive combat experience and a reputation for staying calm under pressure. He volunteered because he had sent too many people to their deaths and wanted to be the one taking the risk for once. 17 others were chosen from the thousands of applicants. Engineers, soldiers, doctors, pilots, young and old, men and women from a dozen different nations, all of them willing to stop being human if it meant humanity could survive. They were given 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks to say goodbye to friends and family. 2 weeks to make peace with what they were about to become. Some of them spent the time in quiet reflection. Others partied like the world was ending, which it probably was. Jake spent his final days as a normal human walking along the beaches near his childhood home. The sand felt warm under his feet. The ocean breeze smelled like salt and seaweed. He tried to memorize every sensation, every small detail of being alive in a physical body. Soon, very soon, all of this would change. On the last night, he met with Lisa one final time. They sat in a quiet cafe in Geneva, drinking coffee and not saying much. There wasn't much to say. They both knew what was coming. "Are you scared?" Lisa asked him. "Terrified," Jake admitted. "But I'd be more scared of doing nothing and watching everyone die." "You might not survive the process," she said softly. "I know. But if I do, I'll make sure it counts for something." Lisa reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Her fingers were warm and very human. Jake squeezed back, wondering if this was the last time he would feel such a simple human connection. The next morning, all 20 volunteers boarded a transport ship bound for the moon. The Ascension facility had been built in secret over the past 2 weeks, hidden in a crater on Luna's far side. If something went wrong, if the volunteers exploded or went crazy or turned hostile, the moon would contain the damage. Jake looked out the window as Earth grew smaller behind them. The blue and white planet looked fragile from space, like something that could break with one wrong move. He was about to become something powerful enough to protect it or destroy it. The responsibility felt heavier than gravity. They landed on Luna 6 hours later and were taken directly to the facility. The Ascension chambers waited for them. 20 crystalline pods arranged in a circle around the matrix itself. The crystal had been transported from Kepler 442b at enormous expense and effort. It pulsed with that same eerie blue light Lisa had shown him in the images. Dr. Amy Watson approached her chamber with steady steps. Captain Ryan Mitchell cracked his knuckles and grinned like he was heading into battle. The others showed various degrees of fear and determination. They all climbed into their assigned pods. Lisa's voice came over the intercom. "Beginning the ascension process in 60 seconds. Good luck to all of you." Jake lay back in his pod and closed his eyes. The crystal's light grew brighter, shining through his eyelids. Energy began to flow through his body, gentle at first, then building in intensity. He felt his heartbeat synchronize with the Matrix's pulse. Then the pain started, and Jake Morrison began to die so that something greater could be born. The Kethran fleet drew closer. Their weapons began charging, preparing to unleash destruction. Jake could sense the energy building up in their ships, feel the targeting systems locking on. The pain was beyond anything Jake had ever imagined. It felt like his body was being torn apart at the molecular level, which was exactly what was happening. Every cell in his body was being deconstructed and rebuilt according to new rules, new physics that human science barely understood. He tried to scream but couldn't. His lungs were no longer functioning in any normal way. His heart had stopped beating, yet somehow he remained conscious. Energy flowed through him like electricity through wire, burning away everything he had been and replacing it with something new. Through the agony, Jake could hear others screaming. The sound was distorted, stretched out as if time itself was bending around them. He opened his eyes and saw Captain Ryan Mitchell in the pod next to his. Ryan's body was glowing with violet light, flickering in and out of existence like a bad video signal. Dr. Amy Watson was screaming the loudest. Her pod was filled with crackling energy that jumped and sparked across the surface. Her body convulsed as her brain rewired itself, expanding to perceive dimensions that humans were never meant to see. Then something went wrong in Pod 7. Private Danny Clark's transformation accelerated too quickly. His body couldn't handle the change. There was a flash of white light, and then Pod 7 was empty except for a fine gray ash that settled slowly to the floor. Lisa's voice came over the intercom, tight with panic. "We're losing structural integrity in Pods 4 and 12. Adjusting energy flow. Another volunteer died. Lieutenant Sophie Adams simply stopped existing. Her matter converted entirely to energy that dissipated into nothing." Jake wanted to mourn them, wanted to feel horror at their deaths, but the pain was too overwhelming. All he could do was endure. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had become meaningless. Jake's perception of reality was changing faster than his mind could process. He could see the atoms that made up his pod, see the corks spinning inside them. He could feel the gravitational pull of the moon beneath him, sense the solar wind streaming past outside. His body was changing shape. His cells were no longer made of ordinary matter. They were becoming something else, something that existed partially in normal space and partially in higher dimensions. He was becoming a being of pure energy wearing flesh as a convenient shell. The pain began to fade, replaced by a sense of limitless power. Jake felt like he could reach out and touch the stars. His consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his skull, spreading out into the facility around him. He could sense the other volunteers going through the same transformation, their minds bright spots in his new awareness. Gradually, the energy flow from the matrix decreased. The blue light faded to a gentle glow. The pods opened one by one, releasing the transformed volunteers into the facility. Jake stepped out of his pod on legs that felt strange and new. He looked down at his hands and saw energy crackling beneath his skin like lightning trapped under glass. His body looked human, but it felt like wearing a costume. His real self was the energy, the consciousness, the power that flowed through every atom. 17 volunteers had survived. 3 had died during the transformation. Jake counted them, his enhanced mind processing the information instantly. Captain Ryan Mitchell stood nearby, his body flickering between solid and transparent. Dr. Amy Watson was staring at her hands with wide eyes, seeing probabilities branch out from every movement. Lieutenant Chris Palmer had gained the ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields. He waved his hand and the lights in the facility dimmed and brightened in response. Sergeant Monica Hayes discovered she could sense and control gravity. She floated off the ground without effort, hanging in midair like a balloon. "How do you feel?" Lisa's voice came from the observation deck above them. She was watching through thick protective glass, afraid to get too close to beings of such concentrated power. "Different," Jake said. His voice sounded wrong to his own ears, resonating at frequencies beyond normal human hearing. "Very different. Can you control it?" Lisa asked. Jake focused his will and created a sphere of force in his hand. The sphere glowed with golden light, contained energy that could probably level a building. He closed his fist and the sphere vanished, the energy reabsorbed into his body. "Yes," he said, "I can control it." The 17 ascended humans spent the next week learning their new abilities. The lunar facility had been equipped with testing ranges, reinforced chambers where they could experiment without causing too much damage. Ryan Mitchell learned that he could phase through solid matter by shifting his body into higher dimensions. He walked through walls like they were made of air. He could also manipulate matter at the atomic level, reshaping metal and stone with a thought. Amy Watson discovered her ability to perceive quantum probabilities went far beyond what they had expected. She could see branching timelines, possible futures spreading out from every decision. With concentration, she could collapse those futures, making certain outcomes more or less likely. Jake found that he could manipulate fundamental forces. He could generate powerful force fields, create bursts of kinetic energy, and even fold space around himself to teleport short distances. His mind worked at incredible speeds, processing information thousands of times faster than before. But the transformation came with costs that were becoming more obvious with each passing day. Jake found it harder and harder to relate to normal humans. When Lisa tried to talk to him about mundane things, he had to slow his thoughts down dramatically just to follow the conversation. It felt like talking to someone in slow motion. His emotions were changing too. Fear, anger, love, joy. They all felt distant now, like memories of feelings rather than actual emotions. He understood them intellectually, but couldn't really feel them anymore. It was like a part of his humanity had burned away in the transformation. The other Ascended were experiencing the same thing. Ryan Mitchell stopped smiling. His face became calm and neutral, rarely showing any expression. Amy Watson withdrew into herself, overwhelmed by the constant flood of probability data her enhanced brain processed. "You're becoming less human," Lisa told Jake during one of their sessions. She was trying to help them maintain their connection to humanity, but the gap was growing wider every day. "I know," Jake said, "but maybe that's necessary. Maybe gods can't afford to be human." "You're not gods," Lisa said firmly. "You're people with extraordinary abilities. Don't lose sight of that." Jake wanted to argue, but he didn't have the heart. Or maybe he didn't have a heart anymore in any meaningful sense. He was becoming something else, something powerful and terrible and necessary. On the 8th day after their transformation, Admiral Barnes contacted them with urgent news. The Kethrin Vanguard had been detected entering the outer solar system. 30 warships were approaching Neptune, moving fast toward Earth. "They're 3 weeks ahead of schedule," Barnes said over the video link. "We need you ready to deploy immediately." The 17 Ascended humans gathered in the main chamber. They looked at each other with eyes that glowed with inner light. They had trained for a week. It wasn't enough time, not nearly enough, but time had run out. "We're ready," Jake said, speaking for all of them. They boarded a transport ship that would take them to the edge of the solar system. The ship felt cramped and slow to Jake's enhanced senses. He could have flown there faster on his own, propelling himself through space with pure force of will, but they needed to arrive together as a unified force. During the flight, Jake stood at the observation window and watched the stars. They looked different to his enhanced vision. He could see their magnetic fields, the solar winds streaming from their surfaces, the gravitational wells they created in space-time. The universe was more beautiful and more complex than he had ever imagined. Lieutenant Chris Palmer came to stand beside him. "Do you think we can win?" he asked. "We have to," Jake said. "There's no other option." "I can't remember my daughter's face anymore," Chris said quietly. "I know I have a daughter. I remember the fact of her existence. But when I try to picture her face, there's just data, information without feeling." Jake understood exactly what he meant. His own memories of family and friends were becoming abstract, losing their emotional weight. He was becoming a being of pure logic and power, leaving his humanity behind. "Maybe that's for the best," Jake said. "Gods shouldn't have attachments. They cloud judgment." "We're not gods," Chris said, echoing Lisa's words. "Then what are we?" Jake asked. Chris didn't have an answer. The transport ship reached the outer solar system after 2 days of flight. They deployed in the rings of Saturn, waiting for the Kethrin fleet to arrive. The 30 enemy warships appeared on long-range sensors, massive and deadly, moving through space like predators. Jake floated in the vacuum of space, needing no suit or protection. His body generated its own atmosphere, its own heat, its own everything. Around him, the other 16 Ascended humans took up positions, glowing points of light against the darkness. "This is it," Ryan Mitchell said over their mental link. They had discovered they could communicate telepathically, their enhanced minds reaching across space to touch each other. "Remember the plan," Jake sent back. "Hit them hard and fast. Show them what we can do." Jake hit the lead Kethrin dreadnought like a meteor. His force field blazed with contained nuclear fire as he slammed into their shields at tremendous speed. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the alien vessel, shaking it from bow to stern. The Kethrin responded immediately. Weapon batteries that could vaporize continents opened fire on Jake, unleashing streams of energy that had destroyed countless human ships. Jake simply spread his arms and absorbed the energy, drinking it in like water. His body glowed brighter as he converted their own weapons into fuel for his power. He reached out with his mind and grabbed hold of the ship's hull with invisible hands made of pure force. Metal groaned and buckled under the pressure. Jake pulled, and a chunk of armor the size of a building tore away from the dreadnought. He hurled it at another Kethrin ship, watching it tumble through space like a deadly projectile. Around him, the battle erupted into chaos. Ryan Mitchell phased through the hull of a carrier vessel, his body passing through solid matter as if it wasn't there. Once inside, he began tearing the ship apart from within. He touched bulkheads and they dissolved into their component atoms. He gestured at power conduits and they unraveled into clouds of particles. Dr. Amy Watson floated at a safe distance, her eyes glowing white as she manipulated probability fields across the battlefield. Catherine missiles that should have hit their targets suddenly veered off course. Shield generators that were functioning perfectly suddenly failed for no apparent reason. Weapons overloaded at critical moments, exploding inside their own ships. Lieutenant Chris Palmer was having the time of his life. He rode the electromagnetic spectrum like a surfer on a wave, jumping from ship to ship and causing havoc wherever he went. He overloaded their communication systems, fried their targeting computers, and turned their own electronic warfare against them. Sergeant Monica Hayes used her gravity manipulation to deadly effect. She created micro-singularities that pulled Catherine's ships toward each other, causing collisions. She crushed smaller vessels by increasing local gravity to crushing levels. She made heavy warships light as feathers and watched them tumble helplessly through space. The Catherine had never faced anything like this. For 3 years, they had dominated every battle through superior technology and firepower. Now they were fighting enemies that didn't play by the normal rules of physics. Human warriors who could survive in hard vacuum, who could shrug off weapons designed to crack planets, who could tear apart starships with their bare hands. Jake punched through the shields of the lead dreadnought and ripped open a hole in its hull. Atmosphere vented into space in a violent rush. He could see Catherine crew members being sucked out, their bodies tumbling into the void. For a moment he felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. Then it was gone, burned away by the cold logic of war. He dove into the ship through the breach. Inside, Catherine's soldiers opened fire on him with their personal weapons. The energy bolts passed through his force field and splashed harmlessly against his skin. Jake walked through the corridors like an unstoppable storm, destroying everything in his path. He found the ship's reactor core and placed both hands against it. He could feel the contained fusion reaction, the tremendous energy held in check by magnetic fields and careful engineering. With an effort of will, Jake disrupted those fields. The reactor went critical, and he teleported back outside just as the entire dreadnought exploded in a miniature sun. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Catherine fought back with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. They had weapons that could destroy planets, but the ascended humans were too small, too fast, too powerful to hit effectively. They had shields that could withstand any conventional attack, but force fields meant nothing against enemies who could phase through matter or manipulate probability itself. One by one, the Catherine ships fell. Some exploded in brilliant fireballs. Others were torn apart by invisible hands. A few tried to retreat, but Monica Hayes created gravity wells that trapped them in place while the others destroyed them. When it was over, all 30 Catherine warships were destroyed or disabled. Debris floated in vast clouds through the rings of Saturn, the remnants of what had been a mighty fleet. The 17 ascended humans regrouped near the transport ship, their bodies glowing with expended energy. Status report, Jake sent out mentally. The responses came back quickly. Everyone had survived without serious injury. Lieutenant Sarah Kim had taken a direct hit from a particle beam and lost her left arm, but she had already regenerated it from pure energy. Private Greg Martinez was exhausted from overusing his abilities, but he would recover. "We won," Ryan Mitchell said, his voice flat and emotionless. "First battle," Jake replied. "There will be more." News of the victory spread through human space at light speed. The Terran Alliance had defeated a Catherine fleet for the first time in 3 years of war. Humanity had its champions, its defenders, its gods of war. But Jake felt nothing as he watched the celebration broadcasts. He saw people crying with joy, hugging each other, thanking their new protectors. He understood intellectually that this was important, that they had given humanity hope, but he couldn't share in their happiness. That part of him was gone. Admiral Barnes personally congratulated them in a video message. "You've done the impossible," he said. "You've proven that we can fight back, that we can win. What are our orders?" Jake asked. "Rest and recover. Intel suggests the main Catherine fleet is still 2 weeks out. We need you at full strength when they arrive." The ascended humans returned to the lunar facility. Lisa was waiting for them, her face a mixture of relief and concern. She had watched the battle through long-range sensors, seen what they had become. "You're changing faster than expected," she told Jake in private. "Your brain patterns are barely recognizable as human anymore. Is that a problem?" Jake asked. "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "You're still fighting for humanity, still protecting us. But you're becoming something so different that I worry about what happens after the war. If we win, what will you be? Where will you fit in human society?" "We won't," Jake said simply. "We can't go back. You know that." Lisa looked like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't. The gap between human and ascended was growing wider every day. The transformed warriors moved too fast, thought too quickly, perceived too much. Normal conversation with them was becoming nearly impossible. Jake tried to maintain some connection to his old life. He watched videos of Earth, of people going about their daily lives. He tried to remember what it felt like to be one of them, to worry about simple things like jobs and relationships and what to have for dinner. But it all seemed so distant now, so trivial. He had touched the fundamental forces of the universe. He had reshaped matter with his thoughts. He had fought a battle in the vacuum of space and won. How could he care about mundane human concerns after experiencing that? The other Ascended were struggling with the same issues. Ryan Mitchell spent hours alone, meditating in isolation chambers. Amy Watson filled notebooks with probability calculations, trying to lose herself in mathematics. Chris Palmer stared at photos of his daughter but couldn't remember why they should make him feel anything. On the 5th day after the battle, they received disturbing news. The main Catherine fleet had accelerated their timeline. They would arrive in 1 week instead of 2, and they were bringing more than just warships. They're bringing their own Ascended, Admiral Barnes told them grimly. "Our intelligence sources have confirmed it. The Catherine call them Void Priests. They've undergone a similar transformation using their own ancient technology." Jake felt something stir in him that might have been anticipation. Finally, a real challenge. An enemy that could match them in power. "How many?" he asked. "At least 60, Barnes said. "Maybe more. They're accompanying a fleet of over 400 warships." The numbers were staggering. 17 Ascended humans against 60 Void Priests and 400 ships. Even with their godlike powers, the odds were daunting. "We'll need a strategy," Ryan Mitchell said. They spent the next week planning. Amy Watson used her probability manipulation to run simulations, calculating the most likely outcomes of different approaches. Jake analyzed the tactical data from their first battle, looking for patterns they could exploit. The Catherine were adapting too. Intelligence reports suggested they were modifying their weapons specifically to counter Ascended warriors. Their Void Priests were training in techniques designed to neutralize human abilities. Lisa worked frantically to find any edge she could give them. She studied the Ascension Matrix, looking for ways to enhance their powers further. But the Matrix had its limits. Pushed too far and the volunteers' bodies would destabilize completely. "You're already at the edge of what's possible," she told Jake. "Any more power, and you'll burn out like those test animals. Then we work with what we have," Jake said. The week passed too quickly. The Ascended humans trained constantly, pushing their abilities to the limit. They practiced coordinated attacks, learned to combine their powers in new ways. Jake and Ryan discovered they could create devastating combo attacks by synchronizing their force manipulation and matter control. On the final day before the enemy arrival, Jake stood on the lunar surface and looked up at Earth. The planet hung in the black sky, beautiful, and the Catherine Armada emerged from faster-than-light travel near Jupiter's orbit. Over 400 warships materializing from folded space in perfect formation. But they weren't alone. Surrounding the fleet like guardian angels were the Void Priests, 60 beings of terrible power that glowed with dark purple energy. Jake could sense them from across millions of miles. Their presence felt wrong, like tears in the fabric of reality itself. Where the Ascended humans blazed with light, the Void Priests seemed to absorb it, creating pockets of darkness that bent space around them. "They're different from us," Amy Watson observed. "Our transformation was about becoming more. Theirs is about becoming less. They've hollowed themselves out and filled the void with pure cosmic energy. Does that make them stronger or weaker?" Ryan Mitchell asked. "Neither," Amy said. "Just different. And very dangerous." The 17 Ascended humans took up positions between the Catherine fleet and Earth. Behind them, the entire Terran military stood ready, thousands of ships prepared to support them however they could. but everyone knew the real battle would be between gods. A communication channel opened. The face that appeared on the screen was Kethryn, with their distinctive 3 eyes and crystalline skin. But this one wore robes that seemed to be made of compressed starlight. "I am High Priest Kel'Vazoth," the figure said. "You have interfered with the collective's rightful expansion. For this crime, you will be unmade." "We're protecting our home," Jake replied. "Leave our space and we'll let you live." Kel'Vazoth made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are children playing with forces you don't understand. We have walked the path of ascension for 10,000 years. You took your first steps mere days ago. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." "No," Jake said simply. The communication cut off. For a long moment, nothing happened. The two forces faced each other across the void. Gods and warships arrayed for battle. Then Kel'Vazoth raised one hand and hell broke loose. 3 void priests shot toward Jake like dark comets. He barely had time to raise his shields before they hit him. The impact sent him tumbling through space, his force field sparking and cracking under the assault. These weren't like the regular Kethryn. These enemies were strong. Jake stabilized himself and counterattacked, unleashing a blast of kinetic energy that could have shattered a moon. The 3 void priests simply phased out of normal space, letting the attack pass through where they had been. They reappeared behind him and struck again, hammering at his defenses. All around him, similar battles erupted. Ryan Mitchell was fighting 2 void priests who could match his matter manipulation abilities. They were locked in a deadly dance, each trying to deconstruct the other at the atomic level while maintaining their own cohesion. Amy Watson had engaged the enemy's chief oracle, a void priest called Sharmoth who possessed similar probability manipulation powers. They fought across branching timelines, each trying to collapse reality into a version where their side won. The strain of the battle was visible in Amy's glowing eyes, which flickered with cascading possible futures. Lieutenant Chris Palmer discovered that void priests could control electromagnetic fields just as well as he could. His opponent, a being that called itself Mothrek, turned his own attacks back on him. They dueled in the electromagnetic spectrum, invisible to normal vision but devastating in their intensity. Sergeant Monica Hayes fought 3 void priests who had mastered gravity manipulation. They created competing gravitational fields that warped space into knots. Planets in the nearby solar system felt the effects, their orbits shifting slightly from the cosmic tug-of-war. The conventional fleets weren't idle. Terran warships engaged the Kethryn Armada, launching missiles and energy beams in support of their ascended champions. But the regular battle was almost an afterthought compared to the clash of gods happening simultaneously. Jake managed to shake off 2 of his attackers and grabbed the third with a force field. He squeezed, applying pressure that would have crushed a battleship. The void priest screamed, its dark energy flickering, but before Jake could finish it, the other 2 hit him from both sides. The fight was brutal and desperate. The void priests had experience that the humans lacked. They had been using their powers for years, maybe decades. They knew tricks and techniques that the Ascended were discovering on the fly. But the humans had something the Kethryn didn't expect. They had desperation. They were fighting for their home, their species, their very right to exist. That gave them an edge that no amount of training could match. Jake took a devastating hit that would have killed him before his transformation. A void priest struck him with an attack that disrupted the quantum bonds holding his body together. For a terrifying moment, Jake felt himself starting to come apart, his consciousness fragmenting into pieces. Then he remembered Lisa's words, "You're people with extraordinary abilities. Don't lose sight of that." He focused on his humanity, what little remained of it. He remembered his name, his purpose, the faces of the people he was protecting. The memory gave him strength. He pulled himself back together through sheer force of will. The void priests looked shocked. They had never seen anyone recover from that particular attack. Jake used their surprise against them, unleashing a massive explosion of energy that sent all 3 tumbling through space. Across the battlefield, similar dramas were playing out. Ryan Mitchell was losing his fight until he combined his matter manipulation with teleportation, appearing inside one of his opponents and tearing it apart from within. The void priest dissolved into dark energy that dissipated into space. Amy Watson found a pattern in Sharmoth's probability attacks. The enemy oracle was powerful but predictable, always choosing the most efficient timeline. Amy started choosing less optimal but unexpected futures, throwing her opponent off balance. She collapsed a timeline where Sharmoth simply ceased to exist, and the enemy oracle blinked out of reality. The tide of battle began to turn. The ascended humans were adapting faster than the void priests expected. What they lacked in experience, they made up for in creativity and sheer determination. One by one, enemy ascended began to fall, but the humans were taking losses too. Lieutenant Greg Martinez pushed his powers too far, trying to match 3 void priests at once. His body couldn't handle the strain. He burned out like a dying star, his energy dissipating across the solar system. Corporal Lisa Chen fell to a coordinated attack by 5 void priests. They hit her simultaneously from different angles, overwhelming her defenses. Her last act was to detonate herself like a bomb, taking 2 of her attackers with her. Private Stephen Hughes simply vanished. One moment he was fighting, the next he was gone, erased from existence by an attack that operated outside normal space-time. The others didn't even see what happened to him. Jake felt each death like a distant echo. Part of him knew he should grieve, should feel anger or sorrow. But those emotions were locked away behind walls of transformation. All he felt was a cold calculation of changing odds. The conventional fleet battle was going poorly for the Kethrin. Without their void priest to support them, the regular warships were vulnerable to human tactics. Admiral Barnes was leading the Terran forces brilliantly, using hit-and-run attacks to whittle down the superior numbers. High Priest Kel'Vazoth saw his plan falling apart. The humans were supposed to be easy prey, overwhelmed by superior Kethrin power. Instead, they were fighting like cornered animals, and cornered animals were dangerous. Kel'Vazoth gathered power into himself, drawing energy from the 0-point field until his body blazed like a dark star. He launched himself at Jake with the force of a relativistic weapon, moving so fast that space itself screamed in protest. Jake saw him coming and braced for impact. They met in an explosion that lit up the solar system like a second sun. The shockwave sent nearby ships tumbling. Even the ascended humans had to shield their eyes from the brightness. When the light faded, Jake and Kel'Vazoth were locked in combat, hands gripped together as they poured energy into each other. It was a test of pure power, God against God, with the fate of 2 civilizations hanging in the balance. Jake could feel Kel'Vazoth's strength. The High Priest was ancient and powerful, had walked the path of ascension for millennia. But Jake had something the Kethrin didn't. He had humanity burning in his core, a tiny spark of what he used to be that refused to die. He drew on that spark, let it fuel his power. He thought of Earth hanging blue and beautiful in space. He thought of Lisa trying to help them stay human. He thought of the billions of people depending on him to win. The energy built to impossible levels. Jake's body was glowing so bright he looked like a miniature star. Kel'Vazoth matched him, dark energy swirling in counter to Jake's light. They were both approaching their limits, the point where their bodies would burn out completely. Jake made a decision. He opened himself fully to the power, accepting that it might destroy him. Better to die protecting humanity than to hold back and fail them. He channeled everything he had into one final attack. Energy that could have powered Earth for 1,000 years flowed through him in a single instant. He directed it all at Kel'Vazoth, a beam of pure cosmic force that turned space white with its intensity. Kel'Vazoth tried to counter, tried to absorb the attack, but it was too much. The High Priest's body couldn't contain that level of power. He began to break. The silence after battle was deafening. Jake floated in the debris field that had once been the Kethrin Armada, his body still glowing faintly with residual energy. Around him, the remains of hundreds of warships tumbled through space, twisted metal and shattered hulls spinning slowly in the void. He counted the survivors. Of the 17 ascended humans who had entered the battle, only 12 remained. 5 had fallen, their energy dispersed across the solar system. The Void Priests had suffered worse losses, with over 30 of their number destroyed. The rest had fled with the surviving Kethrin ships. Ryan Mitchell appeared beside Jake, his form flickering between solid and transparent. "We won," he said, but there was no joy in his voice. "Yes," Jake replied. "We won," but victory felt hollow. Jake tried to summon some feeling about it, some sense of triumph or relief. Nothing came. The emotions were gone, burned away by the transformation and the brutal combat. He was a weapon that had done its job, nothing more. The human fleet was celebrating. Jake could hear the cheers and shouts over the communication channels. People were crying with joy, hugging each other, thanking whatever gods they believed in. Humanity had survived. Earth was safe. Admiral Barnes contacted them directly. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us all. Come home, heroes. Come home." But where was home for them now? Jake looked toward Earth, that blue and white marble hanging in space. It was beautiful, but it felt as distant as any alien world. He no longer belonged there. The 12 surviving Ascended returned to the lunar facility. Lisa was waiting for them, and Jake could see the shock on her face when she saw how much they had changed. Their bodies were barely holding human shape anymore, flickering in and out of normal space. Their eyes glowed with constant inner light. They moved in ways that hurt to watch, existing partially in dimensions that human eyes couldn't properly see. "What happened to you?" Lisa whispered. "We fought," Jake said. "We won. We changed." She ran medical scans on all of them. The results were disturbing. Their human DNA was almost completely gone, replaced by something else, something that current science couldn't even classify. They were more energy than matter now, consciousness held together by will rather than biology. "Can you reverse it?" Ryan Mitchell asked. Lisa looked at him with sad eyes. "No, even if I could, your minds have changed too much. You think too fast, perceive too much. If I put you back in a normal human body, your consciousness would burn it out in seconds." So they were stuck. No longer human, but not entirely ascended either. Beings of power without purpose, warriors without a war to fight. Earth's government wanted to hold a victory celebration. They wanted to parade the heroes through the streets, give them medals, let the people thank them personally. But Admiral Barnes quietly talked them out of it. "They're not ready for that," he explained in a private message to Jake. "The people, I mean. Seeing you like this, it would frighten them. You're too different now. Too other." Jake understood. He had seen his reflection in the polished metal of the facility walls. He looked like a special effect from a movie, a being of light barely contained in a human shell. Children would have nightmares about him. "What do we do now?" Sergeant Monica Hayes asked during one of their group meetings. "The war is over, we won. But we can't go back to our old lives. We can't even be around normal humans without making them uncomfortable." "We wait," Amy Watson said. She was staring into space, watching probability streams. "The Catherine will come back. Maybe not tomorrow or next year, but eventually, and when they do, we'll be ready. But that could be years or decades. What were they supposed to do until then?" The Ascended couldn't sleep, didn't need to eat, and found most human activities pointlessly slow. Time passed differently for them. An hour felt like a minute, a day like an hour. Jake spent his time studying the universe with his enhanced senses. He could perceive things now that even the best telescopes couldn't see. He watched distant stars being born, saw black holes devouring matter, observed the cosmic web of dark matter that held galaxies together. It was beautiful and fascinating, but also lonely. He was seeing wonders that no other human had ever witnessed, and he had no one to share them with. The other Ascended understood, but they were all dealing with their own isolation. Lisa tried to help. She organized sessions where the Ascended could interact with normal humans in controlled settings, but the conversations were painful. The humans spoke so slowly, thought so simply. Their concerns seemed trivial to beings who could perceive the fundamental structure of reality. A young soldier asked Jake what space combat was like. Jake tried to explain, but how could he describe fighting across multiple dimensions to someone who only perceived 3? How could he convey the feeling of channeling enough energy to power a civilization through your body? The gulf was too wide. After a month, Admiral Barnes called Jake to a private meeting. The old admiral looked tired, aged by the stress of war and its aftermath. "I've been thinking about your situation," Barnes said. "You can't stay here on the moon indefinitely. You need a purpose, a mission. What did you have in mind?" Jake asked. "The Catherine came from somewhere out there in deep space. We need to know where. We need to understand their territory, their capabilities, their intentions. I want you and the others to become our scouts, our eyes in the dark." It made sense. The Ascended could survive in deep space indefinitely. They could travel vast distances quickly. They could gather intelligence in places where normal ships couldn't go. It would give them purpose and keep them away from population centers where their presence caused discomfort. Jake brought the proposal to the other 11. They discussed it through their mental link, thoughts flowing faster than speech. "It means leaving Earth forever," Ryan Mitchell pointed out. "We already left Earth," Amy Watson replied. "We just haven't admitted it yet." The vote was unanimous. They would become humanity's guardians in the dark, watching the borders of human space, looking for threats before they could reach Earth. Dr. Lisa Grant cried when Jake told her. "I wanted to save you," she said. "I wanted to give you power to protect humanity, but instead I turned you into exiles. You gave us exactly what we needed," Jake said gently. "We couldn't have won without the transformation. Yes, we lost our humanity in the process, but humanity survived because of that sacrifice. That's what matters." "Will I ever see you again?" Lisa asked. "Probably not," Jake admitted. "We'll be out beyond the edge of mapped space watching for dangers. But you'll know we're there. Whenever you look up at the stars, remember that we're out there protecting you." The 12 ascended, prepared for their departure. They had no possessions to take with them, needing nothing but the energy they could draw from the universe itself. They would be nomads in the cosmic dark, eternal wanderers without home or rest. Before they left, Jake visited Earth one last time. He stood in orbit, looking down at the planet where he had been born. He tried to remember what it felt like to walk on solid ground, to breathe air, to be limited by a fragile human body. The memories were there but distant, like stories about someone else. He thought about his parents, long dead. His friends from before the war. The life he had lived as a normal person. All of it felt like a dream now. Something that had happened to a different person in a different life. "Goodbye," he whispered to the planet below. "I'll keep you safe. I promise." The 12 ascended, gathered at a point beyond the moon's orbit. They formed a loose formation, glowing figures against the darkness of space. They had discussed where to go, what course to take. Amy had calculated the most probable location of Kethrin space based on the direction their fleet had come from. "Ready?" Jake asked the others. "As we'll ever be," Ryan replied. They accelerated together, moving faster and faster until they exceeded light speed by folding space around themselves. The solar system fell away behind them. Earth became a point of light, then vanished entirely. They traveled for weeks, moving through the vast emptiness between stars. Along the way, they discovered their powers continued to evolve. They learned to communicate across light years through quantum entanglement. They found they could sense disturbances in space-time from incredible distances. And slowly, gradually, they became less like the humans they had been, and more like the ancient beings who had created the Ascension Matrix. They were transcending, moving beyond even the godlike forms they had achieved. Jake felt it happening but couldn't stop it. His thoughts were becoming too large for words, too complex for simple emotions. He was turning into pure consciousness, wearing energy as a shell, leaving behind the last fragments of his humanity, but he held on to his purpose. Protect Earth, watch for threats, guard humanity from the darkness. That mission became the core of his being, the foundation everything else was built on. They found the edge of Kethrin space after 3 months of travel. It was vast, spanning hundreds of star systems. The collective had conquered and absorbed dozens of civilizations. Humanity was just one more target on a long list. The 12 ascended established a watch network, spreading out across the border region. They would monitor Kethrin movements, gather intelligence, and warn Earth of any new threats. They would be the silent guardians, the watchers in the dark. Years passed, then decades. The ascended lost track of my. 200 years had passed since the day Jake Morrison and 11 others had left Earth to become eternal guardians. The human civilization they had died to protect had flourished in ways they could never have imagined. Humanity had spread to over 50 star systems, building colonies and space stations across a vast region of the galaxy. The Ascended watched it all from their posts in the darkness between stars. They had become something almost incomprehensible, beings that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their consciousness spanned light years. Their bodies, if they could still be called that, were patterns of energy woven into the fabric of space-time itself. But something was changing. The being that had once been Jake Morrison felt it first, a disturbance in the quantum fields that made up his essence. He reached out to the others through their shared consciousness, which now functioned as a single distributed mind. "Do you feel it?" He transmitted across the void. "Yes," came the response from what had been Ryan Mitchell. "The transformation is accelerating. We're approaching a threshold." They had known this would happen eventually. The ancient race that created the Ascension Matrix had disappeared completely, transcending physical reality entirely. The 12 guardians were following the same path, slowly dissolving into pure consciousness. Amy Watson, who now existed as a probability field stretched across a dozen star systems, calculated their remaining time. 3 years, she determined. Maybe 4. After that, we'll complete the final transformation. We'll become something that exists outside normal space-time. What happens to our mission then? Asked the pattern of light that had been Monica Hayes. Who will watch over humanity? It was a question without an easy answer. For 2 centuries, the 12 had been humanity's shield against external threats. They had turned back 3 more Catherine invasions, destroyed a predatory AI swarm, and diverted an extinction-level asteroid that had been on course for Earth. All of it done silently, without recognition, without thanks. Jake made a decision. We need to go back. One last time, we need to see Earth again before we transcend completely. The others agreed. They began the long journey back toward Sol system, moving faster than light by manipulating the quantum foam of space itself. What would have taken centuries for a conventional ship took them only weeks. As they approached human space, they were shocked by how much had changed. The outer colonies had grown into major population centers. Massive orbital stations hung in space around every inhabited world. Humanity had even begun experimenting with their own version of the Ascension Matrix, trying to recreate what had saved them 2 centuries ago. They shouldn't do that, warned the consciousness that had been Chris Palmer. They don't understand the cost. But humanity had forgotten the cost. The original Ascended were myths now, legendary heroes from ancient history. The stories told about them bore little resemblance to reality. In the popular imagination, they were benevolent gods who had saved Earth and then ascended to a higher plane, leaving humanity to thrive in peace. No one remembered that they had been people once, that they had families and friends and dreams, that they had given up everything, including their very humanity, to become weapons against the dark. Jake approached Earth carefully, his vast consciousness condensing down into something approximating his old form. The others did the same, creating bodies of light and energy that floated in orbit around humanity's homeworld. The reaction was immediate and intense. Every sensor in the solar system lit up. Alarms blared across military installations. Within minutes, a fleet of warships surrounded them, weapons charged and ready. A communication channel opened. The face that appeared was young, probably not even 30 years old. A military commander who had been born long after the war, who knew the Ascended only as historical figures. Identify yourselves, the commander demanded. You're in restricted space. I am Jake Morrison, Jake said, his voice resonating across multiple frequencies. We are the Ascended. We've come home. The silence that followed was profound. The young commander's face went pale. That's impossible. The Ascended are myths, ancient history. We're very real, Ryan Mitchell said, and we've been watching over you for 200 years. Proof came quickly. Admiral Kevin Barnes had left extensive records before his death, classified documents that detailed the Ascension project. Genetic samples from the original volunteers were still on file. The energy signatures of the 12 matched historical readings perfectly. Slowly, the fleet stood down. But the warships didn't leave. They maintained a defensive perimeter, treating the Ascended as potential threats rather than returning heroes. Dr. Lisa Grant had died over a century ago, but her great-great-granddaughter worked at the same research facility on Luna. Her name was Emma Grant, and she had dedicated her life to studying the Ascension Matrix. When she learned that the original Ascended had returned, she immediately requested a meeting. Jake agreed. He condensed his form even further, creating a shape that looked almost human as he materialized in the lunar facility. Emma gasped when she saw him. He was beautiful and terrible, a being of pure light wearing flesh as a courtesy. You're real, she whispered. All the stories, the legends, they're actually real. We're real, Jake confirmed. But the stories got a lot of things wrong. Emma had so many questions. What was it like to transcend? Did they regret the transformation? Could the process be refined so that new Ascended could retain more of their humanity? Jake answered as best he could, but it was difficult. How could he explain colors to someone who had only ever seen in black and white? How could he describe existing in 11 dimensions to someone who perceived only 3? We came back to warn you, Jake finally said. We've detected your experiments with the Ascension Matrix. You're trying to create new Ascended warriors. Yes, Emma said excitedly. We've made breakthrough after breakthrough. We think we can preserve more of the volunteers' humanity, while still granting them power. We could create defenders who don't have to sacrifice as much as you did. It won't work, Amy Watson said, materializing beside Jake. We've run the probabilities across every possible timeline. Any version of the process that preserves significant humanity also reduces power below useful levels. The transformation requires sacrifice. There's no way around it. Emma looked devastated. But there has to be. We can't ask people to give up everything you gave up. It's too much. Then don't, Ryan Mitchell said. You don't need ascended warriors anymore. Look around you. Humanity is strong now, defended by conventional fleets and advanced technology. The age of gods is ending. Let it end. But Emma wasn't ready to give up. What about the next crisis? What about threats we can't predict? What if something worse than the Kethrin appears? Then we'll be there, Jake said. For 3 more years, we'll continue our watch. After that, we'll transcend to something beyond physical reality. But even then, some part of us will remain watching from outside normal space. Humanity will never be truly alone. The news of the Ascended's return spread across human space within hours. People were divided in their reactions. Some wanted to celebrate them as returning heroes. Others were frightened by what they had become, seeing them as alien rather than human. A few political leaders suggested that the Ascended should be contained or controlled, treated as dangerous weapons that needed oversight. Jake found this darkly amusing. Any one of them could destroy a planet with a thought. The idea that conventional forces could control them was absurd. But he understood the fear. They were gods now, or close enough that the distinction didn't matter. And throughout human history, gods had been as much a source of terror as comfort. The 12 Ascended gathered one final time in orbit around Earth. They looked down at the blue and white planet, trying to remember what it had felt like to be part of the civilization below. The memories were there but distant, like looking at old photographs of strangers. Do you regret it? Monica Hayes asked. The transformation. Everything we gave up. Jake thought about the question for a long time before answering. No, he finally said. We did what was necessary. Humanity survived because of our sacrifice. That's what matters. But we lost ourselves in the process, Chris Palmer said. We stopped being the people we were. We became weapons, tools, things instead of people. We became what was needed, Amy Watson corrected. There's honor in that, even if it came at a terrible cost. They watched Earth in silence for a while longer. Then one by one they began to fade. Not dying, but transcending. Moving beyond the physical universe into realms that human language had no words to describe. Jake was the last to go. He took one final look at Earth, burning the image into his expanding consciousness. Then he let go of the last threads connecting him to physical reality. The transformation was both terrifying and liberating. He felt his awareness expand beyond anything imaginable, spreading out to touch the fundamental fabric of the universe. He could see all of space-time laid out like a map, past and future woven together in a tapestry of causality. He was no longer Jake Morrison. He was something new, something ancient, something that existed in the spaces between moments. But deep in the core of his vast consciousness, a tiny spark remained, a memory of being human, of protecting home, and from outside reality, from a place that existed in no particular location in